Good afternoon, everybody. For those of you on the West Coast, good morning, because we're still, firing on morning cylinders. But thank you very much for making time out of your day today to spend with me on this presentation. Before I get started, I think I'm just going to spend maybe 30 seconds kind of giving you some highlights on how I ended up here, because I think it will bring some context as to why I am here today. Many years ago, sort of 95, 96, I worked for a value-added reseller. I sort of worked my way through that industry. I landed at Sprint for a little bit. And during the time that I was at Sprint doing professional services for them, it was right at the time they bought Paranet, for any of you who remember Paranet. So I was acquired during that acquisition. And we had a client by the name of Idealab, which was one of the very first sort of dot-com boom VC funding companies that did Cars.com and many others. And they had a small little hosting company that was in the portfolio. We were managing their data center. We were doing the whole data center outsourcing for them. And I said, what is this thing called the internet? What does it mean to business? And I was very fascinated by this whole remove the server from the data center, because IT guys like to have lunch with their servers for whatever reason. And so I said, well, what does that mean? What does managed hosting mean? So I went to this managed hosting provider, and I ended up being Microsoft's very first shared web hoster in the world. I was part of the Intel's managed services network. So there was 5 of us in managed service providers back in 2000, 2001. And then I went on. My shared web hosting business is now web.com, for any of you who watch golf. And the dedicated business is Pier 1. And a lot of our IP assets went on to GoDaddy. So the reason that I gave you that sort of history is because there's a lot that this industry and this particular room and the talent and the products and services that you sell power a lot of the things that have changed in the market. But now what has happened going forward, and before my time here, I spent a decade at Gartner as a research fellow covering sort of sales transformation and channel development, and I've spoken a number of times at this event. But now under the Salesforce umbrella over the last 18 months, I've spent a ton of time with customers. And this presentation is really to try to get us out of the technology shiny thing in the corner conversation and have a conversation about why it is that we do what we do. So what are the things that customers are actually looking for from us, and how can technology become seamlessly part of their lives in the business world, similar to it is in our personal lives? So with that, I'd say that it's all about this, why should you care? Why should you care? So ultimately, I want you to remember, if nothing else from this presentation, is your customer, if your vendors and your telecommunications providers, is not the partner. And partner, your relationship between you and those providers is interesting, but all of this is about the success of your customers using the technology and services that you deliver. How do you make them more successful at the moment of truth when they're dealing with their customers? When the retailer is trying to check out their customer? When the airline is trying to check in their customer? When the hotel is trying to take care of a change in a reservation or to provide wireless for us? We all walk into hotels today and we expect wireless access. High speed, low speed. When we go into restaurants, we always, do you have a wireless key? We are expecting in our consumer lives what kind of relationship we want to have with technology. However, in the business world, it's not the same. And this is where you have a real opportunity to make change. So the reason this is happening is disruption. So having given you that history of kind of how I ended up here today, there were all these points of disruption. The web was one of them. Then it might have been software-defined networks. It could have been white boxes in the networking. It could have been over-the-top providers on the top providers that are jumping on the backs of telcos, really disrupting markets. It could be the Ubers. It could be all of these things that are disrupting. But in my opinion, the greatest disruptor is actually the customer. We are the ones individually who expect different things from our companies and brands we engage with today. So I'm going to give you an example. This is an oldie, but always works very well. So coffee beans. Not a glamorous market, depending on where you are in the world. I'm from Hawaii, so Hawaii coffee beans, I like to say, are better than anybody else's. But if you say, what is the price of coffee beans? Over time, they have commoditized. But you cannot drink a coffee bean. That is the product. Now I'm going to give you a standard cup of coffee that's at the back of the room. It's free. That is the solution. When you wake up in the morning, you say, I need a cup of coffee. The solution you're looking for is to wake up. That is the way in which you do it. That is the solution. So you've taken the coffee bean, which was a commodity, and in some cases you may spend $1 on a cup of coffee, or you might get it free at an event. The third step would be a Starbucks. So how many of you are staying over at the Hilton across the street? Any of you? Okay. How many of you knew that there was free coffee over here but stopped at Starbucks this morning anyway? That would be an experience. You are willing to spend $5, $6, $7 for a cup of coffee when there was free coffee here. Why'd you do that? How many of you drink Starbucks? Is this being recorded? Okay, so I have to be a little careful now in my new role. So how many of you drink that green brand, right, the green straw? All right, how many of you like it? So interesting, you're willing to spend $7, but it's okay. It's a lot about the experience. How many of you have stood on the corner in a city waiting for an Uber as a taxi drives by? I have. How many of you know what it cost you to ride your last Uber ride? You know what it cost you? How many of you remember the experience of being in the car? Did it smell like cigarettes? Was the guy driving fast or slow? You remember the experience more than you actually remember the price. This disruption is we as consumers and we as customers are making decisions based on the experience we have with brands, and we're far more willing to spend more money if it's a better experience, a la the coffee example. Some cases, the Uber example. So when I say that the customer is more disruptive, that is why customer experience to me is the new battleground. It isn't about the product. It isn't about the service or solution. It's about how do you help the companies that you service deliver a better experience to their customers so that they can have that customers are waiting on the corner for me when another solution drives by. I use Uber all the time because of the experience it gives me. I don't have to turn in my expense receipts. Somebody knows at least where I was at my last moment because they can find me with the app. I don't have to use cash when I'm traveling around the world. Uber solves those problems for me, and I will pay a little bit more money because I don't have to worry about the rest. So it's an experience play for me. So when people say they want to Uberize their business, what is it that they're really trying to do? Is it that they want to digitize the service? Okay, maybe, kind of interesting. But it's really about trying to replicate not the business model of Uber, but as a friend of mine, Mark Bonchek, says often, it's about the mental model that Uber has. So let's think about airlines who tried to copy Southwest over the years. It's a low-cost airline. We're going to compete in the low-cost airline industry. But what did they not copy? They copied the low cost. They fought on cost, like the example that was given this morning. It used to be, $100 or a $25 haircut, and then it made its way down to a $5 haircut. They would compete on cost, but they didn't match the mental model, meaning the way in which they approached the experience customers were having with the Southwest brand. JetBlue did it. JetBlue not only replicated the business model, but replicated the mental model. That's the difference. It's because customers have this different expectation. So you will have customers who will remember the service a lot longer than they're going to ever remember the price you charged. They won't remember when they want you on the phone for customer support or service, or when the product that they purchased was not returned in time or it came damaged. They remember the service, and you talk about with your friends about the service you've had with brands, and then if they say, well, was it a good price? You're going to look, I would have paid anything. The service has been so fantastic. So you have to remember that when you look across the market on brands you may, in your consumer lives, admire from a service perspective, these CEOs are fully organized around putting the customer at the center of every single decision that they make, around the products they develop, the services they give, the way in which they engage with their customers. Tony Heisch from Zappos, basically, he's got something in his customer service is what he leads with his company, because at the end of the day, he's selling shoes. Lots of people sell shoes. But what he's really doing is he's delivering this compelling experience. You can buy a bunch of shoes. What you don't like, you can ship back. There's no shipping. He now teaches a customer experience class that executives from all over the world show up in Las Vegas and sit in there and learn how to deliver that kind of experience. If you want to go get a call center job at Zappos, your last interview, they slide a $2,500 check over to you. And what do they say? You could take this $2,500 check no harm, no foul, we appreciate your 6 weeks of time. Or you can say, I don't want the check, I want to work here. Guess what kinds of people they get? People who really want to work there and have bought into what experience means. So when you say that you look at these brands and you listen to what they're talking about from a future perspective, they're now saying, listen, I'm not going to compete on cars, I'm going to compete on this experience. So Ford is doing something with Amazon and Starbucks. Soon, you're going to be driving in your Ford, and it's going to say, hey, Tiffany, it's 2 o'clock, and I know from your loyalty card at Starbucks that every day around 2 o'clock you have a chai tea latte. You're getting tired? Would you like one? You know what? Alexa, I would like one. Great, there's a Starbucks 2 blocks away. Would you like me to order it for you? Yes, I would. Soon, the autonomous car will drive me there, but let's not get too ahead of ourselves. Today, it will give me directions, and I will drive there, and then guess what I do? I don't even have to whip out my app anymore or hand the money, because guess what my wallet is? My car. So that is happening today. So when you think about the experience now, who's delivering it? Is that an Amazon experience, a Starbucks experience, or a Ford experience? And I'm driving the car, I don't really care. I'm having a fantastic experience. So the difference we have to think about in here is that you guys have got to figure out this collaborative approach between each other, with vendors, with providers, to deliver that kind of experience and seamless experience ultimately for the end user customers. Because they're getting the exact experience you either intentionally or unintentionally have designed for them. So I fly a lot, as many of us do, and I was going to Australia, and I had 5 hotels at a brand that I am a high status on. And so I called in because they said I wanted to make sure my frequent flyer number was, my loyalty number was on my hotel room. So I called the priority line for me, and I said, hi, I've got my priority numbers or my confirmation numbers from the hotel. Can you help and add them to my account? So I start out with, A as the letter, and I start saying them. She goes, oh, I'm sorry, Miss Bova. I can't, that must be an international reservation. I can't help you. So the best thing for you to do is to hang up and call the hotels. I'm like, I have 1 million points. You want me to hang up and call 5 hotels. Now, I'm going to guess that that person on the other end of the phone did not wake up and say, you know what, I really want to piss off our top customers today and tell them to hang up and call back. That's probably not what happened. Somebody along the line said, you need to get off the phone in a minute and a half. You cannot stay on the line. Or the CRM app didn't have a field for them to add it, or they didn't have the ability to call out long distance, or they weren't trained how to do it. But somebody made a decision that it was not good enough to help a customer with an international reservation. Somebody made that decision. So that's what I mean by the decisions that you're making. And because these customers are so much more disruptive, you have got to pivot. You've got to start thinking about what is the kind of customer you want to sell? What kinds of problems do you want to sell in the business world? And you need to back yourself back into that by saying, well, then do I need to work with Google? Do I need to work with RingCentral? Do I need to work with Salesforce? Who do I need to work with? But ultimately, you have to start with the customer. Don't say, you know what, I think this is really cool technology, so I'm just going to go find customers for it. You want to identify what is the pain point, who are the customers, and how can I do it? And so you've got to start to pivot towards this customer experience. Then you've got to say, I've got to think about the analytics to drive the business. I love these conversations about retail as, in this implosion, it's the apocalypse for retail. Yet, there's many retailers that are growing. And then you hear deals about Amazon and Kohl's because an online retailer is trying to get to the storefront. Yet everyone's saying the storefront is being killed by the online retailers. It's a fascinating time. I think that there is retail that can win, and those that you see winning are absolutely using data to do it. Why is Amazon opening bookstores? What kind of data does Amazon have from Amazon Fresh about Whole Foods? They now know what the neighborhood eats, so they can put it in the store. They also know what books you've read over time, so they're not going to put Harlequin, books in a neighborhood where no one buys them. They're going to put the books that people buy because they're looking at the data. So you have to reimagine these partnerships that you're going to have going forward. The person sitting next to you may be able to help you solve this customer experience issue. But if I asked you, who are your customers, you can't say, well, anybody who needs phones, or an SMB. It's like saying a millennial is a segment, drives me nuts. Because I'm pretty technical. There are things I will not do online, so I behave a lot like a millennial in more ways than one. However, on the technical side, there's things I will not do, but my persona of a millennial technically is pretty similar. So when you segment that tightly, you miss that opportunity. So thinking about what kinds of partnerships you'll need. But we're struggling to respond. You know, I have been a champion of this audience for a long time. I remember coming here when vendors weren't showing up and distributors, normal technology distributors weren't coming in. And the flip, I would go to the tech distributor events and I'd be like, you know, are you guys selling voice? And no one was doing it. And so I've been championing this sort of combination. But where we've always missed is in this skills that we need is not about the technology. Now I need you to start thinking about there's a reason why, and it's the customer. So what's happening is you are making decisions in these disconnection points. Your service team, your sales team, your marketing team, and your executives are not talking to each other in a way that puts the customer at the center of why you're making strategic technology investments or business investments or hiring investments. You have to think about how those disconnections are ultimately hurting your organization and your partners, and ultimately your customer. You guys, the way to grow your top line, you have a handful of ways. One is to reduce churn. The reason people leave now is because they don't have a good experience. It isn't because of price. I have a bad experience, it's very easy for me to change my provider. And that experience level and bar has gotten significantly increased because of our personal experience with technology and the way in which we engage in our day-to-day lives. So you've got to reset your thinking. You've got to pivot yourself away from the shiny toy in the corner that is technology and all the things that you hear today and say, what was the application? I was talking to a customer in a call center who had this problem. Yes, this is a way for me to solve the problem. Not walk in and go, I've got new stuff for you to sell. I heard about this. It's bring it back to what their issue is. And so how do you do that? How do you build this modern growth company? Because it's harder and harder to grow the way we've always grown in the past. It isn't just about selling what we've sold. It's about how do you blanket the customer in a way. Remember, they're going to pay you more for a better experience. So how do you blanket them in a way that they don't want to go, even if someone showed up and said, I'll give it to you for less of a price? So I can tell you, hands down, that the answer to that question is in the data analytics of the customers you have today. What are they telling you? What are the signals that the data from the technology that you have deployed in the field, what is it telling you? Where are the spots in which you can increase your stickiness to that customer? I would say, as you've heard many people say before, that data is the new oil. Where I flip this on its head a little bit is I say that analytics is the refinery, because you cannot pull up to a pump in Texas and put straight oil into your car. That doesn't happen. So you need to have the refinery, which I would say is the analytics. The third thing is you need the intelligence, and the intelligence is the gas or the petrol driving your business forward. Data for data's sake, not so interesting. We don't have a shortage of data, but what we do have is a shortage of intelligence of that data. Let's go back to the retail comment I made. Why are some retailers growing, and why are some retailers not growing? The retailers that are growing are knee-deep in analytics, and a lot of them were those CEO quotes that I showed you. So I would say you've got to figure out, don't hoard the oil. Don't hoard the data. Share the data with your partners. Share the data with your providers. Share the data with people that if you combined that data, you could find the right solution. I believe the cure to cancer is already out there. We just can't find it yet in the data because people are hoarding the data. So there are lots of solutions out there if you're willing to do it. Your customers expect you to be where they are going. And this isn't about, I need to be Steve Jobs, sort of I need to know that they needed and wanted an iPod and wanted an iPhone and wanted an iPad. I don't mean that we all need to aspire to be a 1%er in that way or a 3 or 5%er in that way. What I mean is, if you're looking at the data, you're going to see those signals and you're going to know where you need to go. So we as this collective ecosystem, we've got to find a way to develop a beginner's mind, an open mindset, to the possibilities of what technology can do to solve real customer problems and deliver to them an experience they would never find anywhere else. You will compete on your experience because all of you in this room pretty much sell the same stuff. So what makes you different? It has to be the experience in what your customers have with you. And so you've got to think about looking at problems differently, coming up with different answers, and more importantly, asking different questions. So with that, I am out of time, but I hope you found this interesting and inspiring and challenging in ways that when you go back, I would give you one last piece of advice. Nobody does this better, I think, outside of where I work, obviously, because that's where I work now. But I would say that Jeff Bezos is famous for this, that if you're going to hold your next staff meeting or strategy meeting, and you have 10 people in the room, I want you to have 10 chairs for those 10 people. And I want you to keep one chair empty at the head of the table. And who is that chair for? The customer. So when you make a decision about what your business is going to do going forward, or you have an opinion, or someone has an opinion, or they've put up a strategic direction that you should be going in, I want you to default back and ask the customer, is that what they really want? Or is that what we want to do and what we're comfortable doing? Allocating yourself and pivoting yourself towards making customers your true north will become uncomfortable at first and then will become commonplace going forward. So with that, I thank you so much for your time and your continued support. Have a great rest of your day.